is currently in charge of Ukrainian-U.S. relations and the drive to continue the war, the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine at the moment? Because as we all know, George Soros has set up his foundation many years ago, decades ago, before Ukraine was even a sovereign state in the country, and he played a great role in the Euromaidan coup in 2014. We know that there's leaked cables from 2008 with William Burns admitting that they were attempting to put pressure on Russia by creating a civil war in eastern Ukraine. We know that Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piot are two of the main ideological pushers of having Ukraine serve as a vassal state to put pressure on Russia. So who do you think is really in control, if anyone, of Ukraine policy in the White House right now?
Well, I don't think the Ukrainians, per se, are in control of what's happening in Kiev or Kiev any more than most Americans are in control of what's happening in Washington. And there are 2 points that I'd like to make. The first one is that whenever you have such unanimity in the American and Western media, and you have such brilliant timing, such that a piece of news comes out like what you mentioned earlier that's happened in Bucha, it comes out and there's this enormous explosion. It's almost volcanic of hate and criticism and stories supporting all of this against the Russians that bursts on the scene almost immediately, all at roughly the same time. And all of the retired general officers come on and with no exceptions say virtually all the same thing. And when that happens, I step back and I'm extremely suspicious and very skeptical because I've seen this before. I saw it in the run up to the Iraq war back in 2002 and 2003. I saw it in the Balkans with regard to what happened in Bosnia and then subsequently in Kosovo. So it looks like we have a similar strategy now. And the second part of this information campaign, which is very sophisticated, it's being run, I think, largely by us in the West, primarily Washington, maybe MI6 in London, is certainly not the creature of people sitting in Kiev or Kiev. I don't think that's the case at all. But they are clearly responding to this. We're working hand in glove with them. How much of it is us? How much of it is them? I think it's mostly us. And I think we have someone in the form of Mr. Zelensky who really satisfies our requirement to bleed the Russians. Unfortunately, he's bleeding Ukraine and Ukrainians. And that's the bad news. Now, we know that Nuland and Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, listens very carefully to Victoria Nuland. She's been a key player from the very beginning. I'm sure she still is. And these are dedicated Russia haters. They really are. It's very strange. I haven't seen anything like this that I can recall since perhaps the early 60s, maybe the 50s, when we suddenly realized that we'd been hoodwinked in World War II and turned half the world over to Stalin. There were a lot of people then who were extremely suspicious and reacted appropriately. And now we're seeing something that's similar to that, only we're not dealing with communism. Russia is not remotely communist. Russia is a capitalist state. People say, well, it's fascist, which means essentially authoritarian. There are various forms of it. Well, most of the world, frankly speaking, is run by authoritarian regimes. But why Russia is now the center and the object of so much hate and so much attention and so much violence from the West is really a mystery to me, because I don't see it as falling in the same class as, say, Stalin and Stalinist Russia, which deserved to be hated and despised and feared and ultimately attacked far more than anything happening today in Moscow. So beyond that, I can't tell you much more than you already know.